Well, welcome once again to our study of the Parshas as we look at the Torah through the lens of the Jewish perspective. And we're studying tonight Numbers chapter 30 through 32, as well as Numbers 33 through 36. And this will get us through our study of Numbers. In fact, Ben and I are both going to be out of town the next couple of weeks, and so we're making recordings early in order to share with you on our typical Monday nights. But we'll rejoin a few weeks from now as we look at the first Parsha in Deuteronomy. But Ben, tonight, this Parsha, the first one we're looking at is Parsha Mattot, and it's basically Numbers chapter 30 through 32. And as it kicks off, we have sort of the end of chapter, end of verse of 1, saying Moses spoke to the Israelites just as the Lord commanded. And in verse 2, Moses spoke to the heads of the Israelites. This is what the Lord has commanded. And we get into this discussion about vows and oaths, something that I don't know that we talk much about in English or that we normally hear people speak of on a regular basis. But it seems obvious that through this discussion, because all of chapter 30 really is about is vows and oaths, that it was something seemingly very important to the Israelite community.
Yeah, I mean, the importance of the word and the promises was important in the Hebrew scriptures. And the fact that, if you promise something, you should keep that. And God stands out in scripture as always keeping his promises. He is like the writer of Hebrews in Hebrews 10 says that we're to hold fast to the confession of our faith because he is faithful who promised. So God promised and God's faithful. He keeps his word and he wants his people to keep their words. But, many times we promise and we just don't keep it because we don't want to. And then other times there are things, that happen that we can't keep it in the world. But in this distinction here, you have a vow and then you have an oath. The word for vow is neder in Hebrew, N-E-D-E-R. And in fact, on the evening of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, in the synagogue service, there is a song or a prayer. It's a prayer that's sung. It's called Kol Nidre, K-O-L, and then N-I-D-R-E-I. Kol means all. Nidra means vows. And so it's really asking God to forgive for all the promises or the vows that were not kept in the last year by humans. So vows and oaths are very important in Judaism. And you put yourself under obligation when you made a vow. I mean, it's voluntary, but you put yourself under an obligation, like the Jephthah thing in the book of Judges and things of that sort. And in Ecclesiastes, I think there's statements like, if you don't intend to keep your vow, then you better not make one. So,
and I'm reminded, and correct me if I'm wrong or don't have the full story, but we see this in the New Testament when somebody takes a vow based on the temple, or somebody takes a vow based on the gold on the temple. You sort of see this elevation of, well, my vow can outdo your vow because I'm making it with something more important. And it seems to me that is a kind of a degradation of what God really intended. I mean, you don't get that here. You just get this idea that, yes, a vow is serious, but it's the taking of the vow, not upon which order you're taking it, but, it's supposed to be tied to God, not to some other, materialistic idea. And I think we see that kind of degradation even further when the proverbial story of the guy who's out sort of lost at sea and he promises God, if you'll just get me back safely, I'll devote my life to you. And as he starts making his way back, all of a sudden those promises of devotion become less and less until he gets back to shore. And it's like, man, I'm glad I made it all the way back. I put a lot of work into it. And he forgets all about God.
Yeah.
And so you don't get that here, because the rest of this chapter, even though most of it's about the vows of females that we can talk about in a second, how that's broken down, it is a very serious matter.
Yeah, it's a serious matter. And like you brought up there in Matthew 23, Jesus really blasts the religious leaders, the Pharisees, for their vows. I mean, if we lived in a sinless world and we were sinless and we were in a perfect world, there would be no use, for an oath. And the religious leaders would go all around to prove their faithfulness of their word. And Jesus basically says, you don't have to use all that. You let your yes be yes, your no no. But it's almost like, you tell somebody, "Will you promise this?" And they'd say, "No, have my fingers crossed."
Yeah.
Didn't swear by the gold of the temple. But it throughout Scripture, I think there's an emphasis on the seriousness and the importance of it. But yeah, and I don't understand this whole passage, this section here. I don't know.
Well, there's one verse 3, that says, if a man takes a vow to the Lord, or an oath imposing an obligation, he shall not break his pledge. He must carry it out. But then, we have the rest of the chapter, talking all about uh, a woman. And it's interesting, given that we just saw quite a bit of time spent on, can land be inherited by females when there are no sons, and what became as a definitive law in many ways, for all people within the nation, not just that one case of that of the one set of daughters. We have a kind of, okay, what does it mean when a woman takes a vow, and are there differences? Should there be differences? And you kind of got four discussions here of a vow or an oath of a young woman living in a father's house who's under his authority, the vow of a married woman made while she's in her father's house, but under the authority of her husband. That's verse 7 through 9. A vow of a widowed divorced woman, verse 10. A vow or an oath of a widowed or divorced woman made prior to her husband's death or before their divorce. And that's 11 through 13. And how can vows be nullified? What if they're independent women? And I say all this just to say that there really is meant to be an understanding. It's not glossed over. It's not just dismissed. Oh, well, that's women, they're not important, whatever. I mean, it's laid out here with some detail and specificity. Uh, Again, I don't think meant to diminish the women, but in essence to say, yes, there is a role. Yes, there is an understanding, and their vows can be meaningful, and you shouldn't draw this distinction or somehow think less.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. And though it's coming out of a culture that is patriarchal, it's the bottom line is, the vows, the oaths are very important. And again, there are these different circumstances depending on the married status of the woman and also of the age of the woman.
Well, I know, it's kind of hard to really fully appreciate and understand. I think I'd leave us with just this idea that we shouldn't gloss over it, and it was taken very serious. And it, as you said earlier, I think you said earlier that even rabbis today are expected to understand these because it's seen as serious within the uh, Orthodox Jewish tradition even today. So.
Yeah, there to be in Orthodox synagogues, a rabbi attached to that, there to understand this in depth and to give teaching and counsel based on this. So it's somewhat confusing to me, but
Well, as we leave that chapter and we move into chapter 31, we pick up sort of the story of uh, the avenging of the Israelites, or the revenge against the Midianites, however you want to see that. Certainly, it was the women who seemingly led the Israelite men astray, and there are ramifications for that. And as verse 2, it says in Jewish Study Bible, avenge the Israelite people on the Midianites, then you shall be gathered to your kin. So once again, Moses being reminded, your time's almost up, but before that happens, I expect you to take action against the Midianites for what they had done.
Yeah, this is part of Moses' mission. You're not going to cross the river. And so there's a connection between the vengeance of the Midianites and the death of Moses here. And this may be introducing more questions than answers, but really what I question here is, if you go back to chapter 25, the Moabites were involved in tempting the Israelite men to immorality. And then you had that guy, Zimri, and he brought the Midianite woman. That's that specific instance. But in that text, it's like the Moabite women are the ones, at fault. And then here it's you avenge Israel, you take vengeance on the Midianites. And later on, he's even going to specify the Midianite women of this. And so I guess, the question is, what about the Moabites? And Rashi says they are excluded here because Ruth later, she's an ancestress. I can't remember. Is she great grandmother or great grandmother of David, King David? And so that's why that Rashi says that's why the Moabites are excluded from taking vengeance on them. And then he suggests also it may be because the Moabites acted out of fear and the Midianites acted out of hatred. So I don't know, but I know that I guess I can just leave it standing there. Why vengeance on the Midianites when the Moabites are highly involved in this?
Yeah, I don't know either. I was just sitting here thinking, though, that again, we just finished a chapter where the emphasis is placed on, for the most part, women keeping their word and in essence bringing honor and keeping their honor. And yet we have a situation here where the women of another country have led them to be in conflict with God, and now will be suffering the consequences of that.
Here, you have a passage in Deuteronomy 2, verse 9, when the Lord said to me, so Moses said, the Lord said to me, you don't provoke the Moabites, you don't provoke them to war, for I will not give you any part of their land. I have given Ar to the descendants of Lot as a possession. And the Moabites are descended from Lot. In fact, it's that episode, that's not rated G, where Lot and his daughters, and one of the children born from his daughter, one of his daughters is from the Moab. Moab means from and then of, from the father. So that's the background to the Moabites. But again, I don't know why, here they're excluded, but the Midianite is there to take vengeance on the Midianites.
Well, as we look how that vengeance is going to play out, there appear to be about 3 or 4 main focus or topics within this chapter. You see a key military role for the priesthood. You see the fate of male and female captives in what amounts to a holy war. What happens to the soldiers and the spoils of war, and how all that is taxed for the sanctuary. So in some ways, the focus is not really on the battle, because there's not really much mentioned about the actual battle, but it's all the legal precedents that seem to be set from that battle, and what comes out of that, which is really the emphasis of this chapter.
Yeah, and it's, I'm studying Proverbs or teaching Proverbs on Wednesday, and it says the horse is made for battle, but the victory belongs to the Lord. And so the Lord is giving the victory to his people here. And a part of that victory is vengeance on the Midianites, judgment on the Midianites. And so, like a theological theme, where there's victory, there's also judgment. Like we're in the already but not yet, and the victory that Christ has provided, and then yet the last enemy, death, and so there will be judgment upon death, and death will be no more. But we have that victory. So yeah, the emphasis is not really on what happened in the battle too much. I mean, it tells us some, but yeah, you're right. It's what comes out of that.
We see Pincus, who we saw last time, in the last Parsha that we studied, being this assigned, the priest of the battle, priest of the military. And then we also see Balaam, who was sort of the instigator of all the whole mess of the women seemingly coming from Moab or Midian, and he's put to the sword.
Yeah, Rashi says he was from Aram, and he comes over here to Midian to claim his reward, and so he's involved in that. Let's back up a little bit to verse 5.
Yeah.
When it's out of every tribe 1,000 that you send to war. And so it says in verse 5 of chapter 31, the NIV says, so 12,000 men armed for battle, 1,000 from each tribe, were supplied from the clans of Israel. And that Hebrew verb supplied or provided or delivered or furnished or something like that is in the nifal, and the nifal is a passive. And so Rashi says it means the passive, they were delivered forcibly. They didn't want to go, and so they were coerced. And then you wonder, why don't they want to go into this battle? And Rashi says it's to their credit, because God told Moses, you're going to die, but one thing you must do before you die is this battle, this vengeance. And so Rashi says they know that Moses will die when this war is won, and they don't want to go, and they don't want victory at the cost of Moses' life. And so they're showing their love to Moses. And so they had to be delivered against their will, delivered forcibly. So
kind of like pressed into action.
Pressed into action because they know what will happen after the battle. But they do go, and as you said, Pentecost leads them.
One of the things I thought was interesting is they, as we said, this really wasn't much about the battle. We see some of that in these verses, but what's interesting is the Israelites, beginning in verse 9, took the women and children captive, seized all, this says booty, their treasure, so forth, all their beasts, herds, all their wealth. They destroyed the actual sort of encampments, the towns, but then they bring it all back. And Moses is quite upset at what they've done. And what he says about them, I think, is kind of interesting, as he, sort of says, it was all the women that were the problem, and you spared them all. You didn't annihilate them. You didn't take out the vengeance. It's like, why would you even do that?
Yeah, he's very angry at them because of that. And then he goes back through the whole thing, because they caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to break faith with the Lord in this matter of Peor. And then that brought the plague.
Yeah.
And so Moses says, you take care of that by, killing every woman that's known a man by lying with them. So it seems very cruel to us, but again, this is serious when you think about the gravity of the sin of Peor.
Yeah. Well, it's God's divine justice upon and punishment upon a people who obviously don't follow him, but not his people in that regard. And plus it's a flip side. He's commanded, as we'll see numerous times, to take certain action by the Israelites, and they often don't always follow that out for their own selfish reasons.
Yeah, if we ever, get to teaching Joshua, and the primary moral problem there is, how can God command the Israelites to completely destroy, annihilate these people? And that's a serious question. This question needs to be asked. Yet, God told Abraham that he was going to give the land, but it'd be around 400 years or so, because the sin of the Canaanites is not yet completed. They have time to repent and to listen. So it's a difficult problem, but again, God is a holy God.
Absolutely. Well, I don't know how much of this if any, that you want to really go through. I'm sort of thinking about, as we look at the rest of these verses, just a lot of sheep, a lot of animals, a lot of wealth is brought back from this battle or war or skirmish with the Midianites, and it lays out how it's all going to be divvied up. Which again, I don't know what of that you want to talk about, if any, but they sort of conclude this with in verse 49, talking about, hey, and we don't even have any of our own people missing, right?
Yeah.
It's that, and so you sort of get the impression it's that complete of a victory against Midian. As you got all this wealth coming in, and then we didn't even lose anybody.
Yeah, not one man of us is missing. And the rabbis understand that in the plain sense, there were no casualties in this battle, but they also suggest that there's a spiritual lesson here, that these soldiers are saying, the whole thing that brought about the battle were the Midianites, women enticing the Israelite men. Here you have men going off into battle, and they brought back, these women, and the men say that the rabbis understand it's not just that we don't have casualties in this battle, but not one of us were led astray by the Midianites like before.
In contrast.
Yeah, in contrast. And to show gratitude, then you have in verse 50, they bring all those gifts, that jewelry. And then in 52, they have all that gold that they bring. And there was 1,000 from each tribe, so that's 12,000. And these are the leaders that are reporting. That's like 132 men, I think. And the commentators say that this is just a staggering amount of gold that was brought, and they're just a small portion, 192 of 12,000. So they're bringing all this to God.
Well, like you said, it is a lot, and then they have to be purified. They have to because they're unclean from this battle and this war, and then we have the end of that, and all of a sudden now we're starting to think about moving into the promised land. But before we do that, we're still on this side of the Jordan, and we find that there are a couple of tribes who don't want to go. they like it where they are, and that has its own implications and ramifications that we're going to take a look at.
Yeah, in chapter 32 and verse 1, it says, children of Reuben and the children of Gad had a very great multitude of cattle. I'm sorry, I'm getting tired. They had a multitude of cattle. And the rabbis say, where did they get all this? And some suggest they got it from this battle with the Midianites, but why would they get more than everybody else? But so we just don't know. But then when they saw this land on the east side of the Jordan, that behold, that place was a place for cattle, then they go to Moses and they suggest, why don't we have our inheritance here. A midrash says that they didn't really have more cattle. Of course, that would go against, I think, a plain reading of verse 1. But the midrash says that they attach more importance to their herds, and that might come out in their words.
Right. Yeah, our words sometimes betray us. And what's interesting is that in response to this request, right? And again, as you said, they're thinking about all the land, all the sheep or cattle or anybody else, any livestock they may have on it. They go to Moses, and Moses, his first response is, "Why are you?" And I'm paraphrasing. Why are you doing this? Why are you trying to turn away the people from crossing over, just like your previous brothers would have done, your fathers would have done, when I sent them into the land to spy it out. And you see how that went when they came back saying we can't take the land, we got punished for it. And now you're basically giving the same impression that we shouldn't cross over, that we should stay here and think about what's going to happen to the people now. So Moses seems to be quite irate over this.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very serious comparison, because that previous generation is not around anymore because of that, the spies and what happened there. And Moses says it seems to be the same thing what you're doing here. And I would say, to the credit of the tribes of Reuben and Gad, that they don't say, "Oh well, we didn't think about it like that." They continue to say, "No, that's not what we mean," and they back that up later by their actions. But there is kind of a subtle thing here, because they come and they say in verse 5, let this land be given to us. Let me see. I don't know if that's the right verse. It's where.
Verse 16 might be where you're looking.
Yeah, verse 16 is the verse. Yeah, where they come and they say, "We've built for our cattle and places for our cattle and cities for our little ones." And then Moses replies in verse 24, "I think your priorities are not right. Build cities for your little ones, and then for you take care of your cattle or your sheep." And then verse 26, it's almost like they amend their request to Moses' subtle response by saying, "Our little ones, our wives, and then our flocks and our cattle shall be for the cities." So
yeah, if you like the way that wordplay takes place, it's like they see in their head, "Oh no, we got a great place for our livestock, and oh yeah, we're going to build some cities and houses for the kids." And Moses saying, "Well, maybe I'll think about the kids first, families first." And you can sort of see the light bulb. Oh yeah. You know what? Not only just the kids, we're going to put our wives first too. And then we'll get to the flocks and so forth. But either way, Moses, their offer was, "Hey, we'll be the point people on going into battle. We'll be the vanguard. We'll be the point people if you'll let us do this." And Moses says, "Well, if you keep that oath," which is interesting. We just had that study about oaths. So if you basically keep your oath, keep your promise, then okay.
And they do keep it in Joshua 6 and verse 7. They kept their promise.
And so then we have a kind of a recitation here of where they actually built and what they did, the cities and so forth. And Moses did give the land to them. And so we sort of end this Parsha, the Mattot that covers these first 3 chapters, and we move into our second Parsha, unless there's anything about these particular.
Let me say just real quick here. In verse 28, Moses gave the charge to Eleazar and Joshua, about this, and he said, this is what they promised, and this is what they're to do. Moses is not going to be around, and so he's telling them that. And then we have in verse 33. So we've had Reuben and Gad, Reuben and Gad, and then in verse 33 it says Reuben, Gad, and then the half tribe of Manasseh. And it's almost like, where did they come in here? Because they weren't there at the beginning. And the rabbis ask, why do Moses include them? And there are a couple of approaches here, real quick. Just go through this. Some say that the land is on that side of the Jordan would be too large for only 2 tribes. And so Moses asked if any other tribes would like to settle there. And in response, Manasseh volunteered. Another suggestion is that Moses knew, the Jordan River is this dividing line. And so Moses knew that there would be a danger of 2 tribes on that side and then the other tribes on the other side. And we see that danger in the book of Joshua. We won't get into that, but they actually have an altar that's involved, and it about gets to a point where, those tribes are going to be destroyed by the other tribes. That's in the book of Joshua. But Moses tries to avoid the danger there, and so he places half the tribe of Manasseh there, thinking, I think, that they would stay in contact with the other half of their tribe. And then a third suggestion by the rabbis is that he insisted that the half tribe of Manasseh settle there because no Jewish community can maintain its spiritual health or even exist unless it has outstanding Torah scholars. And the tribe of Manasseh had such people, the rabbi said. And so he said, you need some people around, who will teach. And so those are suggestions.
It's interesting, though, that I guess all the priests, though, the Levites, would have gone over across the Jordan. So would they have left any there on the east side of the Jordan where Gad and Reuben and the Manasseh would have had, priests, or what would they have done, do you think?
Well, we know that there were 6 cities of refuge, and the cities of refuge came from the 48 cities that the priests were given. And 3 of those are on the east side and 3 of those on the west side. Okay. So those are 3 priestly cities. So I guess you would have priests who lived in those cities because they don't really have inheritance.
That makes sense. All right,
so we're ready to start the next Parsha, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. Beginning in chapter 33, and this is the Parsha Massei, and it comes from the word journeys, which we sort of see beginning.
Now we'll go into great detail on the map where all these places.
Yeah, once you get your map out and you go through all of them.
Point to it. Not really. We don't even know where most of these places are located.
But that there's an itinerary, right? You got all these. I don't know if it's every last one, but you certainly have a lot of the different stops along the way from their departure of Egypt to get to the point where they are. And why do you think it's important to have this list? Is it important to have a list of sort of where we were before we got to where we are?
Rashi says the list emphasizes, and I think there are 40. I don't know right now. Yeah, 42 places where they camped. And so Rashi says the list emphasizes God's compassion because they wander in the wilderness for 40 years, but they had periods of rest. And so he says, so you have 42 places where they camped. The first 14 were before the spies were sent out, the disaster that's there. The last 8 were in the 40th year after Aaron's death. And so he says, so during the 38 intervening years, there are only 20 journeys. So it shows God's compassion and his mercy. And some of the rabbis go into detail that each of these 42 places has spiritual meanings, but that's using their imagination a lot. It does say in verse 2 from the NIV, it says, at the Lord's command, Moses recorded the stages in their journey. This is their journey by stages. So you have stages in their journey and then journeys by stages. And the order is reversed there. And Rabbi Hirsch understands that the first phrase is how God understood their journeys, and the second phrase is how they understood their journeys. And the way God understood their journeys is they're progressing, they're going to the next step in his plan. They're going to a goal. And the way they understood their journeys is like human nature. They became impatient and dissatisfied. And so they're just going forth. They're not looking at the long-term goal. And that may be reading a lot in those phrases, but it is interesting. You have the words reversed.
Well, it starts out, from Ramses in the first month on the 15th day of the first month, which is certainly important to us, as we know that the Passover took place, and then all of a sudden, they were to be ready to leave, and then they left right after the day of the Passover.
Yeah, and then you have here also in verse 4 a statement, I think it's in Exodus 12, that the plagues were judgments on all the gods of Egypt. And
yeah, so the Israelites are able to walk out because the Egyptians are busy burying their dead, and
God is showing them too that, and he's showing the world that all of the gods the Egyptians worship are nothing compared to him. And we went through that when we talked about in Shemot or in Exodus about the plagues. And, they worshiped a god of light, or sun god, Amun Re, and now it's darkness all throughout the land. But yeah.
Well, sometimes I know we maybe learn things from how things are recorded in English we don't often appreciate, but like whether something's plural or singular, does that mean anything? And sometimes I know in this passage it seems like the Jews as a nation are referred to in the plural, but other times it's singular. Is there anything from that we should take away?
It begins like they are referred to in the plural, and then in I think the verse is verse 7, but it's the singular, and the rabbis say, even Ezra the rabbi says, it shows they're unified. It might also show that that the pillar in the cloud, the pillar of fire in the cloud that led them. But as we look through the history, at various times they are united as a single person. I think we saw that like in Exodus 19 around Sinai, that when they answered as a single person.
Yeah.
So as they're traveling, they're a single person.
Well, I don't know if there's anything about the actual encampments that you want to talk about. I was looking down here, you get to verse 38, and all of a sudden you have Aaron, who's mentioned again, and we're reminded that he died on Mount Hor, but also sort of added that he was 123 years old, right? So we got a little bit more new information, I think. But again, the lifespans of these individuals still quite lengthy.
Yeah.
Not as long though as they used to be.
Yeah,
And
before the
even
flood.
by today's standards, even though the average today, we still have people who are living into their hundreds. So uh, again, but the fact that Aaron has died, this is a big event, still something that is captured and remembered by the Israelite people.
Yeah, yeah. I don't have much to say on that, but yeah, those are milestones along the journeys, I think. You know, Miriam dies, Aaron dies, and it's almost like, you know, they know Moses is going to die. I guess, you know, Moses had announced to the people, the Lord told me I'm going to die. I mean, they knew he was not entering the land.
Right. Well, we come to verse 50, and we're back on the steps of the Moab, um, and at the Jordan near Jericho, and the Lord speaking once again to Moses, and telling them that when they cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, you shall dispossess all the inhabitants of the land, destroy all their figured objects, all their molten images. You shall demolish all their cult places. And we'll see that again, I think, in other places being reminded of that. But God, I mean, we know God's telling them, hey, you got to get rid of all that. And we saw them not be able to do it really with the Midians and the Midianites. It's like, how are they going to do it in the whole land? And obviously they're not, because we know that they didn't get rid of all the sort of graven images or molten images or the high places that they may have. In places they did, and at times, but it was something they continue to struggle with.
Yeah, I mean, they continue to struggle even, you know, into the time of Kings and the book of Kings. And at the end of Joshua, you know, Joshua says, put away the idols that you have. So it's a constant struggle for them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he says at the end of that chapter, if you don't do it, they shall remain, and they remain, there shall be stings in your eyes and thorns in your sides, harass you in the land where you live, so that I will do to you what I plan to do to them. And I think in the end, we see that really is what happened
Yeah.
with the destruction of Israel.
Yeah. And what's sometimes called the Deuteronomistic history from Joshua to Kings. And, you know, whether that's accurate or not, people have argued and used that phrase back and forth. But in Joshua, they receive the land, and in Kings, they lose the land. And they lose the land. And Kings is in the prophetic book of the Hebrew, or prophetic section of the Hebrew scriptures. It reads to us like history, you know, but it's prophecy because they lost the land because they didn't listen to God. And even here, he tells them, you know, if you don't do this, then I'll do to you as I did to them.
Well, we get to chapter 34, and Moses is getting some instructions on the conquest of the division of Canaan, division of the promised land. And it's interesting, you know, again, sort of talking about how big your territory shall be, and what it shall cover, and uh, things about it, and how again it's going to be divided up, and who's going to be in charge of that. And I just think that's kind of again an interesting that Moses, I mean, is it actually told by God, here's what your land is going to cover.
Yeah, and you get in Joshua too. I mean, he goes into great detail, like from this rock to the here to there. It's like, and it reads very in a legal language. I mean, if somebody said, you know, you turn down there at that road by that, you know, that yellow house, it's on the left, you turn by it. Well, you go to the courthouse and you look up that house, you're not going to find in the legal language in the books the yellow house on the left. You'll find, you know, so many degrees or feet over and all this kind of, you know, language like that. That's what you have in Joshua. So he's telling the boundaries of the land here. Yeah.
Well, as we move into 35, again, we're getting more about crossing over into Canaan, and here in verse 2, instruct the Israelite people to assign out of the holdings a portion of them towns for the Levites to dwell in. So once again, a reminder that the Levites aren't going to be left out of God's promise.
Yeah, they have 48 cities that are given, um, and that comes from all the tribes. And then out of those 48 cities, they have 6 cities that are cities of refuge.
And even though they don't get any of the big land, they do get some land, right? You know, a
Yeah.
1,000 or 2,000 cubits of land, and certainly some of the cities that are going to be there, and God's providing for them as well. But I want to move down just with some of the time we have left.
And we're about out of time, aren't we?
We're getting there, but I
Yeah.
want to talk about this ideas of the of what constituted murder, what constituted manslaughter, so to speak, and what that meant for people trying whether or not they could get to a city of refuge, or what qualified you to get to a city of refuge, and the idea that you couldn't buy your way out of murder in many ways, in all ways, which is something I think we think, well, if you're rich enough, you got enough money, you can buy your way out. Well, God makes it clear here that you can't buy your way out. You can't make economic restitution for the crime that you committed.
And that shows the dignity of human life and the way God views that. And also, I mean, the idea is not like, okay, if you can get there fast enough and you get that city, then you're clear. There had to be a trial, and there had to be, a trial um, by the elders and by the leaders. It was these cities of refuge, to keep from something happening before that time. So if you intentionally killed someone, um, you couldn't just run to a city of refuge and have, and say, okay, well, I made it. So that's clear. Um, and the rabbinical writings talk about the roads have to be kept in good shape, getting city refuge. The signs have to be very clear, where you're going. And there were 3 on both sides of the Jordan River.
And whose responsibility was it to sort of ensure that, um, that I guess justice was carried out? Who sort of ensured that if you had a relative that was um, killed or murdered, that the appropriate actions were taken, that you got the justice that you were looking for.
I mean, you have here mention of the avenger of blood, and that is sometimes translated redeemer, and that's the word goel, and that's the word that's translated redeemer um, throughout the Hebrew scriptures. And so it's somebody. It's also, Boaz is a goel of Ruth, so he redeems Ruth. So it's not just this, but it had to do with land, and it had to do also with this. This is important as well. But it's this close kinsman, this who has this obligation, to it's like the dead person can't stand up for themselves, and so they're standing up for them.
Yeah. Well, I think we talk about certain acts of social justice and other
Yeah.
justice today, and we may not fully understand it, but I think there is this constant cry throughout Scripture that those who have been wronged, those who have been hurt, those who have been uh, violated, are not to be dismissed or overlooked. There is to be justice for them.
Yeah, certainly. And God himself, it's not going to be perfect in this life, but
Right.
God himself knows that.
Well, as we end with 36, it's kind of interesting. Once again, the 5 daughters of Zelophehad come back because you got this time the leaders of the tribe of Manasseh, one of the tribes there, one of the clans there, saying, "Hey, if the women marry after they've gotten this land to somebody outside of our clan, we're going to lose that land. It might go to somebody else. That doesn't seem right." And uh, the Lord says, "Yeah, you're right. It doesn't." So, He makes provision for that. But I guess the only thing out of that is, other than God, again, making provision and drawing and demonstrating what the right answer is that this story keeps coming back and back. I mean, this is, I think, the third major time that this family has, in their situation, has been worthy of writing down in Torah.
Yeah, and even their names are given.
Yeah.
That each time. So it's not like I'm teaching on the miracles of Jesus on Sunday morning class, and I'm kind of looking maybe roughly in the order there in the Gospels. And this past week we looked at Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law, and it's strange, we don't know her name, but again, he heals her, and then when she is healed, the text says she begins to serve. So she stands as, I think, an illustration of the when we are restored by God, it's the work of serving. We're to serve, and yet she goes down. We don't even know her name. Yet here, these daughters are named, and they're named a couple of times. So one thing I guess you could say is, they are persistent for what they believe to be the blessings that they should get and keep from God.
Well, as we end, the book of Numbers ends with verse 13 of chapter 36, saying, "These are the commandments and regulations that the Lord enjoined upon the Israelites through Moses on the steps of Moab at the Jordan near Jericho." And so we sort of see, here's where we are. Here's everything that's come to pass up until this moment of time, right before we seem to want to enter into the land of Canaan.
Yeah, and that sets us up again for the last book of Torah that we will begin. And we've mentioned this 3 other times before, that it's customary at the end of the reading of a book for the Jewish people to join together in a saying that is really it's a plea for to encourage each other, but it's also recognizing something that we get from Scripture, and those words are kazak, banit, kazak, which means be strong, and we shall be strengthened. So maybe fitting for you and I to join together in that phrase and close this Parsha.
All right, let's do it.
So we count it all for, yeah.
All right, ready?
Yeah,
Set,
go.
Go.
Kazak, banit, kazak. So it's a encouragement. Be strong, and may we be strengthened. And the strength comes, the reason it's said at the end of the reading of the book, because the strength comes from Scriptures, and it's encouraging each other to be strong.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
Well, Ben, thank you very much for your time, and to everybody who's watching, thank you for joining us as you watch this video, and for being with us during our study of the Torah. And we're looking forward to being back, going live in person again in the middle of July, and we start off with Deuteronomy, the first Parsha of Deuteronomy, a couple of weeks from now.
Yeah, we appreciate you watching, and we appreciate you being involved. And again, the invitation is open to anyone who wants to join on the Zoom call. And I'll be sending out the email, and we'll put an announcement on Facebook soon about the Deuteronomy class. So thanks again for watching, and we will close.
All right. Bye.
Bye.